Yeah, hi, I'm Nick. I work on Swift support on the Kotlin Multiplatform team at JetBrains. And some of you might remember AppCode. That was our team as well. Thank you. So let me get started with maybe some overview for those of you who haven't heard about Kotlin Multiplatform. So as I said, it's a technology by us, by JetBrains. And as the name says, it allows sharing code between platforms. But what makes Kotlin Multiplatform maybe a bit different from other cross-language or cross-platform tools is that it doesn't dictate at all what you can share and what you cannot share. So which platforms are we talking about? Of course, Kotlin started out as a replacement for Java, so it has a big ecosystem on the server that can access. Of course, it's on mobile. It's a primary choice today for Android developers, and it's available on iOS. And at JetBrains, we've been writing desktop applications for almost a decade now. And finally, it's available on the web as well. So we have had a JavaScript backend for a while, and we support WebAssembly now. So how does it work? You might imagine having 3 separate apps, like very simplified view here, different layers, presentation layer, all the way down to the business logic. And typically, you start just sharing business logic. So you still have your native UI in each separate app. But you can go a step further. You can start sharing presentation logic as well, for example, your view model, and still write native UI. But with our new Compose multi-platform, you actually can go all the way and share the entire application if you want to. Yeah, so actually, it looks like this. You have 3 apps. You can have platform-specific code in each one, and you should just share what you want and not more than what you want. And how does it work? Well, basically, you just write one module of shared code, and you import that into your app. So on the iOS side, Kotlin native uses an LLVM backend and produces native code for you. It's just a framework that you drop into your Xcode bundle. And on the Android side, it's a jar, and the Android people do what they do with it. So there's no so it's LLVM backend. There's no emulation, no virtual machines. It's all native on the iOS side. So what are the benefits? Well, I already said flexibility is a big benefit. We want to give you the choice to just share what you want and not everything. That means you can just take an existing product, 2 separate apps, and start sharing just one single function. You don't need to throw everything away and just start from scratch with a new language or a new tool stack. And of course, the whole point of sharing code means that you have less effort, you have less cost, and you can focus more on the quality of the app and making sure that you invest your time where it's really making a benefit for your users. Yeah. And finally, shared code also means there's this amount of consistency, right? If you write one single client that accesses your API, you don't have to worry about slight differences. Maybe the iOS app has a different sync mechanism or whatever, right? You just have one piece of code, and yeah, it works the same way everywhere. And finally, with Kotlin Multiplatform, you can just access your native APIs. There's no wrappers, there's no abstraction. It's just native code. You write it as before, and you access the native APIs as before. And you might be wondering who's already using Kotlin Multiplatform. Well, here's a bunch of companies. We have a page of case studies where we showcase some people who have been using it. I'm going to highlight a few of them quickly. So there's McDonald's. Their app actually shares, their global app shares the business logic between iOS and Android. And then we have Philips. You know them from the U ecosystem. They used KMP to create their cloud SDK, and so they simplify how app developers can interact with their infrastructure. And finally, Forbes, they share actually 80% of the logic between iOS and Android, and that allows them to roll out new features very quickly and to respond to user demands and to what happens much more quickly than by having separate apps for iOS and Android. So you can find these case studies on our website. I'm going to repeat all the URLs at the end, so you don't need to write anything down or take any pictures now. But now let's go to the main topic, and it's just examining some myths about Kotlin multiplatform and cross-platform development in general. So the number one thing that I always hear is like Kotlin multiplatform is targeted to Android developers, right? But if you take a look at it more closely, what does it mean it's for Android users, right? It's true that Android developers are quite quick to adopt Kotlin multiplatform because they're very familiar with Kotlin. Kotlin is the main language for Android development today, and they're familiar with the tools, Android Studio, IntelliJ. It's all very easy for them, right? But we know actually Kotlin is a general purpose language. I already said it started as a replacement for Java, so it has a strong background on the server side. We've been using it for desktop applications for many years, and it's getting popular in data science now. And Swift started out as app development language as well, and now it's spreading out, and Kotlin's actually even further along that same path. And yeah, Kotlin is also no longer limited to Android Studio and IntelliJ. Our team is building new tooling that includes a new IDE and new build systems, means no more Gradle, hopefully, specifically for people who never used Android in the first place. But do iOS developers actually find it useful, find using Kotlin multiplatform useful, and do they contribute to the shared code? So we talked to a bunch of teams in that regard as well. And Ben Escher, an iOS developer at Autodesk, says that since they have a shared code base, both teams collaborate much more. And the educational app Quizlet, they said that with iOS, with Kotlin multiplatform, Android, iOS, and backend engineers are eager to write in Kotlin. And Meetup told us that the iOS engineers contribute to the shared code base just as actively as Android engineers. So they have more productivity and more collaboration. Another concern that iOS developers often have is that their workflow will become super messy, right? To say, oh, I don't want to install any more tools or those Android tools. But actually, when you get started as an iOS dev, you don't need anything special, right? You just get a binary framework, you drop it into your Xcode project, and you just use it. Of course, over time, you'll want to contribute to this shared code base, or at least contribute it. And actually, there's not that many tools that you need to install, right? And we're working on streamlining this process, so it's much more uniform and simpler to set everything up. And the next question is probably, will I be productive with those new tools, right? And yeah, absolutely true. Android Studio is very, very foreign for iOS developers. The same goes for IntelliJ. There's no denying that, but once you get the basics, there's some quite nice surprises in there, right? I encourage everybody to just ask their Android counterparts to maybe get a tour of the features, and especially check out the refactorings. It can really pay off very quickly to invest some time in learning these tools. And as I said, the tooling is becoming more neutral as well. We're working on this IDE that is targeted not to Android developers, but to the shared audience. And this tooling is currently in preview. You can see it in Fleet. So Fleet is our polyglot code editor and has the usual features like navigation, refactoring, find usages. And we offer these features for Kotlin, for Swift. That's actually many of the features that used to be in app code are available today in this package. But crucially, we also support these refactorings and navigations cross-language. So you can, if you have shared code and you want to refactor something, it actually updates the names in both the Kotlin code and the Swift code. Yeah, and this is what the IDE looks like. So you can see it doesn't look anything like IntelliJ. And yeah, we have some Swift code that's actually just calling into Kotlin code. You can see at the top there's import shared, right? So that's the shared module. And if we navigate to that, we just jump to the Kotlin code. And those of you who haven't seen Kotlin before, you know, if you squint, it pretty much looks like Swift, so it's not very different. Yeah, and of course, the other direction works as well. So if we do find usages here, you can see that this shared code is called from both the iOS app and the Android app, right? And you can just see both of them in the same place, both usages and with code previews. So that's the tooling. So let's talk about how the languages interact. So everybody here probably wants to write really Swifty code. Sorry. Okay. Now, does it work? Yeah. So does interacting with a different language keep it possible to write Swifty code? So let's talk about how this works, right? So Kotlin Multiplatform is actually quite mature, right? It started out in 2018, and back then Objective-C still ruled the world, right? So actually Kotlin Multiplatform is interoperable with Objective-C and not directly with Swift, right? And so the decision was made because it can interact with all iOS projects, and at that point, you know, Swift was still developing, right? Around Swift 2, Swift 3, they kept changing things back and forth. There was no API stability, right? So that was the situation back then. So that's the reality. Kotlin is not interoperating with Swift directly, but it's using Objective-C Bridge. And you probably all have worked with Bridge Objective-C, right? Even if only in the system frameworks. So you have an idea of how Swifty your code can be when you're using Kotlin. So that means for Kotlin multi-platform teams, you know, some Kotlin features work exactly as expected. They just bridge. Some work with some small workarounds. Some will actually work better as a community, using a community solution instead of language features. Some features don't work optimally right now, and you know, some features just don't work at all. And luckily, there's a great resource here that's called the Interopedia. It's a website that lists all the language features and tells you which features can be used to interoperate between Kotlin and Swift. So it explains all the features, what the current status is. It has lots of code examples, gives workarounds in cases where there's problems, and it actually has some nice demo code you can try out. Yeah, this is where you can take a look. Again, this will be repeated at the end. There's also a great talk specifically about interoperation between Kotlin and Swift from the Kotlin Conf. So if you're interested, it's quite a short talk. You can check that out as well. But yeah, the reality is, for this to work nicely for Swift developers, you know, teamwork is required. So the Android developers and the iOS developers need to work together, you know, to make APIs that look nice from Swift as well. And the more the iOS devs contribute to this, the better the result will be. But there's also a positive note that Swift export is in progress. So that means some of the pain points of going through Objective-C will disappear. But of course, there will never be a perfection, right? You cannot never completely losslessly bridge two languages. For example, Kotlin, like most languages, is a much simpler generic type system than Swift. Yeah, and so you always need to be careful about how to design your APIs. Yeah, and if you want to take a look at an example of how the Swift export works, you can do it here. Yeah, and now for the elephant in the room. Probably everybody has been thinking about this for the last 15 minutes. You know, the majority of us probably don't like non-native UIs. Yeah, so does Compose Multiplatform have a native iOS look and feel? And the reality is, it's not the same, but many companies these days actually prefer to have their own branding, their own UI, be consistent between platforms, and have that more important than being native. And there's also a way to have community themes and components that maybe get it closer to what you want. But as I said already, that's the thing I really love about KMP. You can just still write your native UI, right? So if none of these things apply and you really value your custom UI, or your native UI, you can just build it and it will look the same. So another concern is that performance of a separate UI framework like Compose will not be the same as native iOS. And it's true, right? It probably never will be 100% the same. The performance is fine right now for most use cases. It's still in beta, and we're still working on improvements, but there's a lot of things you can do where it's good enough for what the use case is. And the final thing I want to cover, we all like Swift to some degree at least, and we have made it part of our career. So many of us may be concerned that, well, if we adopt this, I won't get to do Swift anymore, right? Because we're just writing this one app and it's not what I signed up for. And that's definitely true for a lot of cross-platform solutions, right? They might require you to just write a new project in a completely different language. But that's the great thing about Kotlin Multiplatform, that it allows you to write as much Swift as you want to, right? And your team decides what's valuable to share and what is important to write natively. But still, if you want to contribute to the shared code, you might be concerned that you will not be able to contribute things as efficiently, as quickly as in Swift, which you've been using for many years. So yeah, this is another thing that's actually true, right? But I would recommend that you just start small. You know, you can even small investments can already give you a benefit, right? You can start sharing just some code. You can inherit some code from the Android app for free, right? And free you to work on more important things. Yeah, and over time you can build the expertise to make an impact yourself. And yeah, as an iOS developer, you might think, well, why bother learning Kotlin at all, right? It is a waste of time for my career. But Kotlin is actually quite easy to learn for Swift developers. When I started writing Kotlin 8 years ago, I came also from the Swift side, and I did not read a book about Kotlin. I took the editor and started typing Swift, and then fixed the compile errors, and yeah, it just worked, right? These languages are very similar, and it's very easy to learn for somebody who's coming from Swift. And I made the experience that learning another language gives you a different perspective, and it helps you appreciate the things that you like about Swift, and maybe some things that you realize are not perfect as well. Yeah, and after all, it will only give you more options in the future to know both major languages for app development. Yeah, and finally, you might be concerned that now all my job is only reduced to writing UI code, right? If you remember the layers I showed earlier, right? There's where you can share all the business logic, and you just have the UI layer native. But as I said, your team really decides what will be shared and what isn't, right? And if you introduce it gradually, there's always enough Swift code until you're ready to contribute to Kotlin. Yeah, now that we talked about the myths, I'm going to give you some pointers about where you can get started learning more about Kotlin. And this is a great book. It's written in part by the authors of the language. This book didn't exist back when I started working on Kotlin, so I had to use the compiler error method. But it's really a great book, and I can only recommend it. And we have a lot of documentation about how to set up the environment, right? How to set up a JVM, Android Studio, and the plugins. Especially, I can recommend KDoctor, which is a command line tool that basically analyzes your environment and tells you what is broken and how to fix it. And yeah, as I said, we're working on streamlining this process, especially with Fleet. We can make this process much easier, and you don't need to read this long document. But anyway, this is the URL. And we also have a bunch of sample code. For example, this one. So Ktor is a networking framework, and SQLite is a database framework. And both these frameworks make, like many Kotlin multi-platform frameworks, make it easier to just write native stuff in the shared code. And this URL where you can find it. And we also have a Slack. Basically, you can ask any questions you want about the language. You'll find people there who are very knowledgeable. Many people who work at JetBrains also are in this Slack. And yeah, you can get an invitation on this site. So in the end, let me summarize it a bit. The key takeaways are, what can you do with Kotlin multi-platform? It allows you to share code in a very flexible way, so you decide what to share and how much code to use, and you can still use native code. Why do you do it? Because it saves you time. You can focus on the things that are really important, and maybe some of the code that is not so exciting, that just needs to be stable, you can share, or if you want to really invest in it, you can write most of it and reduce the effort significantly. And Kotlin multi-platform is a technology for iOS developers also, right? It's not just for Android developers, and it allows everybody to write shared code, and it really fosters collaboration between teams. It helps integrate iOS and Android teams, and they really start pulling in the same direction. And when Kotlin multi-platform is special in the regard that it doesn't mean you have to throw away your code, right? You can just start adapting it piece by piece. You just take one function, introduce it into your app. You don't need to throw everything away. But if you want to start a new project, you can also start it like fresh with Kotlin multi-platform in mind. And finally, maybe the most important is how to use Kotlin multi-platform. It's really important that you do it together, like you really want to unify Android and iOS teams, to have this shared understanding of what the apps are supposed to do and what is valuable to share, and really to create a vision of what makes sense to put into the shared code. Yeah, and if you want to have a summary of that, you can take a picture now, or you can come by the booth later. I'm happy to show you the slide again. Yeah, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Nikolaj.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. So I would expect people to have some questions. So maybe I'll just do my first own comment first. I think it's fairly easy when we see something like this to be a bit sit back in the chair, arms crossed, like Jeff is doing up here, just to single someone out. And I think just for myself, I think sometimes we have a certain stubbornness and professional pride, and but this is what I do. I do the real thing, and I think we should try not to confuse that with, or maybe it is often confused with our kind of insecurity about actually trying something new and doing what is pragmatic sometimes in our organization and whatnot. So just want to kind of give that as a small extra comment. Yeah, I think we have a question in the way back up here, way down there. Can we get a mic run? Yeah, run. Yeah. Run, Forrest. We'll do that one over there for efficiency, and then we get the green guy back there afterwards.
Yeah, and again, I invite everybody to come to the booth and ask questions there if you don't want to share them publicly. And yeah, we also might have more time for technical answers there.
Yeah, hello. Eden. So my question is pretty simple and straightforward. Have you guys ever thought of doing a Swift multi-platform? You know, going the other ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really Apple's job, right? No, for us, Kotlin is the language, right? We invented Kotlin for our own purposes, right? We needed a replacement for Java, and really believe in Kotlin as the best language for all these stacks, right? Again, I came from the Swift side. I love Swift. But learning Kotlin has given me also another perspective, right? And there's definitely things that make Kotlin a more pragmatic language. It's a simpler language compared to Swift. And yeah, that's why we really believe in Kotlin as the vision.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have the next question down there.
Yeah, I would like to understand the workflow. So from me sitting in Xcode, doing my UI, adding a button, doing some business logic in Kotlin. I guess that is in a different IDE, and then back to the what is compiled and so on. Before.
So right now, that's the situation is basically we have a Kotlin project that is probably used in IntelliJ or Android Studio, and it compiles, and you get a binary framework, and then you drop that into an Xcode project, right? And that's, of course, a situation that nobody's happy with, and that's what we are working on. My team is working on making this tooling better. So that's why we have Fleet. Basically, we can have one editor where you have all the most important features for working with Kotlin, for working with Swift. We've integrated the simulator, right? You can build from Fleet. You can look at compose previews, right? We want to really have integrated in this one place. And yeah, of course, if you want to keep using Xcode, that's kind of gonna be the two IDE solution for you. But we want to make sure that there's an option that integrates everything, especially like in times when you want to debug something, right? You want to step between the languages. It's really important to have one place. Or if you want to refactor a method and you don't want to do it twice, manually change it in Xcode, right? So that's what we are focusing on to make this use case specifically better.
Okay, and your IDE is also doing previews in Swift UI.
It's doing previews for Compose. Swift UI is not currently supported.
Yeah. Let's say that you decide to write the UI with Kotlin. Do you have also available the possibilities of using the SF symbols directly, or you just have to export them?
Sorry, I have to look that up. I don't know if I personally just work on the Swift support, the language support, right? So I will come to the booth and we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a question here. Right here. Yeah.
Hello. So setting engineering aside a little bit and moving to the good old budget topics. As we all know, we have some pressure from up the chain usually.
Yep, sure.
Now, how would you compare Campy to Flutter? And for example, if you have a team of 5 Flutter engineers and then a team of 5 native engineers with good Campy knowledge, and we have a standard mobile application with around 40 screens. Now, which of the teams would consume less budget? And yeah, in terms of deadline, it's a tricky question, but yeah.
No, I probably have no answers in terms of like measured productivity, right? At least not scientific ones, right? The main benefit of multi-platform there is basically that you can use the same team with knowledge of Kotlin already and of iOS, and just have the same people start sharing code, right? And that you don't have to throw away code if you have an existing project, right? That's another benefit, that you just start sharing and just pulling things into the shared platform. Yeah, in terms of productivity in total, I have no no scientific data there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think we'll do this one as the last question.
Yeah, so if any other questions, again, come to the booth.
Yeah, we do one last one here.
Yeah.
Now. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the interesting lecture. And I'm just curious, when do you plan to replace Objective-C output with Swift? As I don't have any problems with Objective-C, but it's kind of weird when you go in there and see other code other than Swift.
Yeah, so that's what. Yeah, again, I briefly showed that there's a project on the way to replace that. I cannot give you any timelines because it's not quite my department. But if you come to the booth, I can basically go to Slack and ask the people what the timeline is.
Okay, thanks.
Good. Thank you very much, Nikolaj.
Thank you.